All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is James Green. I'm here at the University of Maryland. I'm the director of our master's program in product management. I've been at the university now 20 years. Feels kind of odd to say I come from kind of a startup background, late 90s, early 2000s, in both a software startup as well as a hardware startup. It kind of played a product management role before we really called it that at the time, and have been active on campus in a variety of programs around entrepreneurship and innovation. In the technology space, my faculty appointment is in engineering, but we serve students from many different majors from across campus. And I'm fortunate tonight to have some kind of friends and colleagues that are going to share a little bit about their journeys and experiences in product management. Official title of what we're up to is getting your first job as a product manager. And so within that, we've invited people to come to hear a little bit about that process. Thanks for joining. We may have, additional people join, which is great as well. Looks like we're at nominally 30 or so. So that's a nice number, particularly for this specific topic. And we wanted to start by giving our panelists the opportunities to introduce themselves, a little bit about their background. And I think they'll kind of reveal more of their background and their journey in the context of the topics that we're going to be covering tonight. So I'll go ahead and start with Damien.
Yeah, thanks, James. So my name's Damien Peters. I'm currently a adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, teaching the program for product management, along actually at the University of Colorado Boulder, teach a class on tech enterprises. Outside of that, I'm a managing partner at WN Capital Partners. We focus on real estate investing and actually product management, coaching and consulting. So we work with companies that are in need of experienced PMs. My background in terms of kind of how I ended up here is long and random, so I'll just kind of keep it quick. Started at University of Maryland, studied computer science and economics, went into consulting in the DC area, then went to MIT for business school. Knew I wanted to get into tech, big tech. I had interned at Microsoft and IBM like in undergrad. So after grad school, I interned at Zynga during the heydays of Farmville and Cityville, if anyone played. Afterwards, went to a competing startup called TinyCo. After a year of that, went to Facebook, and Facebook is where I spent most of 3.5 years, around 2015. But a lot of my formative understanding in terms of product, working with some really great product leaders. And then after that, I joined a startup, joined a nonprofit around Black software engineers, moved my family to Spain for 2 years, joined a Spanish startup as their head of product, pivoted the entire company during COVID from one product to another, moved back to America, joined Citibank. I forgot, I started a company in the middle of all of that. Then that company was acquired in January 2022. Did not enjoy being an employee again, so left in July of 2022. And after that, I started WN Capital Partners. So WN Capital Partners really kind of, and my work at Maryland and Colorado are really expressions of what I love. Real estate has always been a strong driver in my life. Coaching and helping others, both in kind of like university context, but also in terms of helping companies that really are struggling with building great products. So super excited, a lot of experience, both product outside the US, inside the US, kind of from an academic and practical standpoint, and super excited for everyone and to answer any questions.
Terrific. And Damien mentioned questions. So there is that Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to go ahead and use that now. We might answer some of them during the session, or we might save and address some of those towards the end as well. So feel free to post things there as you wish. But Rob, can you give us a little bit of an intro?
Sure. My name is Rob Aikens. I studied mechanical engineering at the University of Maryland around the same time Damien was at the University of Maryland. And after that, I went into economic consulting, which is a little bit of a jump, and then decided to do my MBA at Stanford. At Stanford was really when I decided I wanted to work in technology. And this was right around the time that the iPhone App Store was becoming really popular. When I left Stanford, I became the co-founder of a mobile app gifting startup called DrinkCode. Worked on that for a couple years. During that process, got a lot more into software engineering and became very technical. Worked as a freelance web developer, mainly for an ed tech startup for about 2 years. And then I went to Google, which is where I really have a lot of my product management experience. I spent 5 years at Google working in ads, creating a new campaign type that led to a lot of revenue at Google, and learned a lot about just being a product manager and working with larger teams while at Google. So happy to expound on that. After Google, I decided to start working on another startup. Was working on that. It was in the fintech space with sustainable investing. Spent 3 years working on that. Just recently transitioned out of that, and I'm back to software engineering. So I kind of bounce back between product management and software engineering. So can definitely talk about that as well. And yeah, that's sort of the quick background.
Terrific. So I was rejected from MIT and Stanford years ago when I applied, but I did get into Michigan. So from a football perspective, it's a good day
Much
to be a
better.
Michigan alum.
Much better.
Exactly.
Yeah, Stanford's team is not great this year.
The engineers don't
aside,
exist. I mean, they exist. I don't know if they actually play or know how to use a football.
I think it's a club team maybe at MIT. But as product management goes, we thought it made sense to kind of talk about finding that opportunity in the beginning of, how do you identify a role that's out there? And so maybe we'll start with that. I'll kind of put that up for grabs as far as who'd like to go first on identifying the right opportunity.
Damon, you want to go first?
Sure, why not? So I will say I pride myself in both finding and interviewing and things along those lines. Did interview coaching actually for people like joining Facebook for a couple of years actually. But there's a lot when I like to think about or tell people when it comes to finding the right opportunity. Part starts a little bit with a little bit of introspection. One is what is it that you like and don't dislike about being a product manager? I tend to find so you'll find that roles will heavily have you talking with sales all the time. You may need to be extremely technical, or you may need to be really digging in with the user. If you like one of those more than the others, it's something to really think about. There are a couple different aspects I find to a product management role, and I think it's kind of understanding and talking to people and thinking about, again, kind of what you want to do and what's going to be best, and also strategically around your career. One big thing about kind of having a successful PM career is racking up some wins early on. You get some good product launches, you'll have interview fodder for decades. But yeah, I find like thinking about a role from the industry aspect. Is it social, mobile? Is it hardware, software, fintech? There's a function. So there's a lot of functional PM roles, a growth PM, a data PM, a technical PM. So no matter what company, there's kind of a construct. The state of the company. So your PM at a startup is very different than being a PM at Oracle, or vice versa, government. So tech and non-tech too. The product itself, so even you can be at Google, but you can be working on a bleeding edge product. So the skills to launch a product are different than to maintain and grow revenue. And then lastly, I think business model. So kind of going back, if it's a sales-led company like Salesforce versus if it's a marketing-led company like Apple versus an engineering company-led company like Google, they all have different nuances to how you think about your job. And in some cases, you will excel at some of those if you're a marketer. You may really hate Google, but and vice versa if you come from an engineering background, that type of thing.
I agree with everything Damien said. I would say the one thing that I found in my career that was really helpful is, working at Google on ads is the most important thing Google does, right? So like being in that sort of nexus of the company and being in a space that's growing revenue really gives you more and more opportunities. So you'll be able to launch things, you'll get resources faster and rack up those early wins, like Damien said. That's a big part of the sort of selecting the right space in my mind. I also think stage of company matters a lot. If you go to a company that you're going to be the very first PM, unless the founder or CEO or CTO has product management experience, you're not going to get the same degree of mentorship. you're going to get a lot of experience. You're going to get a lot of hands-on opportunity to, try things out and move quickly. But you might not get that same degree of mentorship. Whereas at a Google, at a Facebook, at a Oracle, at all of these large tech companies, there's going to be systems in there to mentor you and to teach you. So there's sort of pluses and minuses to both, because you will move slower, right? Like Google has review processes and lots of steps in the way to get a launch out. So there's sort of constant trade-offs. I would say that you do want to the degree that you can be passionate or interested in the product that you're working on, that's it, because you're going to spend day and night thinking about it. You're going to sort of need to meet with customers and like care about their problems and like solving, fundamentally as a PM, you are trying to do something for your customer, right? So having empathy and caring about your customer is very important. If you were sort of a customer of that product, that can also be very beneficial because you'll have a better understanding. I think, they always talk about how PM and founder are like similar. And I've kind of been in both roles, and there's definitely a degree to which you are in both of those roles, just fully concerned about your customer and making sure that you're providing something that is valuable to them.
Terrific. So I'm looking and responding to some of the Q&A as we go as well. Kind of related to that, Damien, you had mentioned finding the right opportunity might in part be based on, kind of the technical acumen or background that they're looking for. And I think Chris asked about product managers at his current organization at Zillow. The majority, I believe he said, or most have an engineering background. So, which if you view Zillow as a software company, not to be, not necessarily surprising, but in your experiences, do you find that most product managers everywhere are technical, or is that not necessarily the case?
So, depends on the company. And
Okay.
Rob can definitely answer this when it comes
Yep.
to Google. Google had a hardcore, if you do not have a technical degree, you cannot be a PM here.
Okay.
Facebook, right before I joined, they finally started letting in people who went to MBA. Like they adamantly hated all MBAs. It was like a thing. It was like this joke. Everyone, and then we like once they let one of us in, we kind of like opened the door type of thing. And also to even going back to finding the right opportunity. One reason I started at Zynga loved MBAs. Their founder, Mark Pincus, he went to Harvard or some. So also sure, they had this huge MBA PM culture, and even strategically finding the right role right after B school, led to that. But yeah, I found it highly varies by company. And Rob, yeah.
Yeah, I would say Google has very much softened on you have to have a technical background. But there's certain roles where it's very beneficial. I would say like at Google, depending on your role, you're going to have 50% of your time interfacing with engineers to 80% of your time interfacing with engineers, right? And you need to have credibility with your tech leads, right? As a product manager, at least at Google, the way that it's structured is your engineers don't report to you, right? You have no actual authority or power over them. What you have is your ability to influence them. And that's very important. And if you cannot understand the problems they're facing, if you can't communicate with them effectively, then you're not going to be able to have that influence, and you're not going to be able to get your product shipped. So you don't need to have a technical background, but you do need to have technical acumen around the product that you're PMing. If you're at a tech company, there's definitely products that are much more sales focused that it would be better to have a sales background, or an MBA might be better, or a marketing degree might be better. So it's the like Damien said, it very much varies between PM roles. On my team, we had people from sales transition into product management without a problem that didn't have technical backgrounds. So it's definitely possible, but you need to make sure that you're aware of you need to become at least capable of conversing about the product that you are trying to PM.
Okay. Kind of rounding out or rounding the corner from identifying the opportunity to making your application stand out. There's one question regarding what platforms do you recommend for finding your first job? So for you all, did you go into product management as a transition after your graduate degree? Was it like a career services thing, or were you on the respective companies' HR websites and Indeed.com? Was it more relationship, kind of working your contacts, or how did you find kind of your first opportunity there?
I guess I'll take this one first. For me, it was through LinkedIn, through a recruiter reaching out to me. So it was, this is one of those things where if whoever's hiring a lot, it's a lot easier to go to companies like that. And at the time that I joined Google, Google was hiring a lot. I'd actually tried to go to Google 3 years beforehand, and they just weren't, it was worse economic times, and they were essentially like a non-starter and didn't even, talk to me. Whereas, at the time that I went, it was because they actively recruited me. So a lot of these things are variable by company. I think right now is actually things are picking up. At least I'm based in Oakland. I'm sorry I didn't mention that at the beginning. So I'm in Silicon Valley essentially, and things are definitely picking up again. So now is one of those times where it's good to get in. But I would say LinkedIn is probably the place where I see most of the jobs. And then career services, when I was coming out of business school, was definitely helpful. I don't know, when I was coming out of Maryland, I wasn't really looking at product management. So I don't have as much context for back when I was at Maryland. Times have also changed, I'm sure.
So I will say, and like things are different because later in life and so forth. Everything is through LinkedIn. Like I really need to. Well, LinkedIn got acquired because otherwise I'd buy more LinkedIn stock. My role here at Maryland came through a DM on LinkedIn. My other role at Colorado, I sold my company from a DM through LinkedIn. I got hired at City through a DM and LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. And basically, LinkedIn to me is one of the greater platforms. But one aspect of LinkedIn why it's great is not just the job section, but it is the other people you know on LinkedIn. Those are where I get jobs from. I do have applied from jobs online. Product management, oftentimes, especially at big tech companies, like literally, for example, I know at Facebook at one point, if you applied online, go into some pool, if you were recommended or if they had any flag that you were ever recommended by anyone at the company, there was like a red halo, I think, that showed up around your application. Whether, obviously the best, strongest, the chief product officer recommends you, that's going to be the best, but literally as close as that, right? If it happens to be like a junior designer recommends you, that you'll be shocked compared to not knowing anyone or not having any recommendations. Networking, especially if you are out in the Bay Area. I'm in Maryland now, but I was there 7 years. So when I was at Facebook, I was at Palo Alto headquarters. Tons of events, meetups, groups, things along those lines, especially where there's a heavy tech presence. You'll find the ads PM meetup. You'll find like the healthcare app-based AI, there's like everything's so sectionalized. And then the last thing I do say in terms of finding opportunities is, for me at least, the real application is when I have a communication with the recruiter. So oftentimes that's what I focus on. If I see a job that I'm really interested in, I look to see if I know anyone at the company. If I don't, I will look to see if I know anyone who knows anyone at the company. And then lastly, I will look up the name. I will type in HR, technical recruiter, whatever it is. I, again, have had a pro LinkedIn account for decades, but send them, I call it the digital equivalent of a cover letter. It's a small intro about yourself, particularly why you're interested in that role, things along those lines. And you'll find that huge differentiator I found. Worked better 8 years ago as opposed to today. There's just a lot more noise, but those I think are really important when it does come to securing the opportunities.
I will echo Damien's point. Like having a referral will move your application at Google a lot faster. At least that was true pre-2020, and I assume that's still true today.
So the next stop we wanted to make was one about making your application stand out. So once you found that opportunity, you found something that aligns, with your background, your interests, your ambitions, and now you're going to be one of, perhaps a large number of folks applying. What do you do at that point to kind of be a individual applicant that stands out versus the others?
So I do have a lot to say about this, as having done a lot of coaching. If you actually look on YouTube, there's like 4 mock interviews and stuff along those lines. But what I'm going to say is we bias to Facebook hiring process too, and each company is a little bit nuanced. One, especially for bigger tech companies, there's a concept we used to call it the I think it was the Google question, which is we would say, why do you want to work at our company? If we could swap out Facebook for Google, you failed the question. And what that means is you want to be a PM at a big company, which is nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. That is just not what we are interested in. You're not going to stand out by being an excellent PM. You're going to stand out being an excellent PM at my company. That may be talking to friends there. I tell people read the 10K. Usually there will be notes in there about what are our key risks as a company. There's like a note from the CEO. You want to understand what does that company care about or feel about. The more you can talk to PMs there, it definitely helps to understand. For example, there's kind of giving like random one-offs, but if you talked about too many times in the interview, or if you asked what level you would come into at the company, it's usually an instant no hire. Because your view is that you're here, again, to get a good job at a big company, and you're not necessarily key. The number of people that are applying, especially for bigger roles, is asinine the number of people who are applying for every open position. And then when it does come to the interview, when I say stalk the person that you're interviewing, I always say not harass, but ask uncomfortably questions of your recruiter that you feel that they should not answer. I've had several people be told the questions they were going to be asked by asking the recruiter. And I view this as fair game because as a PM, you're using all the tools available to you to do the best, which is your outside research, asking that person, things along those lines. One of the last things I do think to stand out is understanding your strengths and where you're mediocre. For us, again, biased Facebook interviewing practice, we wanted to see you we would ask the question, is this person going to be one of the top 10%? Are they going to redefine product management? We were much better that someone kind of sucked at 80% of things, but they were world class in that 20%, because you can't teach that. We can help oftentimes and work and coach and see and get you at a base level, but that excellence you can't teach. So if there's something that you're amazing at, you break down data in a way, you understand users, you are super technical, make sure that you can show and highlight your superpower and understand your superpower, and don't necessarily just try and address all your weaknesses.
I agree with all of that. One thing I will say about smaller companies is really know the product. At Google or Facebook, there's a lot of products. It's, you should know them generally. If you've never used Facebook, don't apply to Facebook. That's silly. I don't think there's going to be as much of a hammer on knowing that product deeply. At least at Google, that was true. The idea was everybody at Google knows the product better than you. We're not going to expect you to know sort of the library of products. But when, talking to other founders and looking at jobs at smaller companies, the expectation is that you really know that product before that interview, and you've done a lot of research, you understand their competitive landscape, you've got 3 or 4 suggestions on how to improve that product. And you want to, when you're coming into that process, you make it clear that that you're thoughtful and that you care, and this goes a little bit to Damien's point about, you're not just trying to be a PM at a company, you're trying to be a PM at this company. And that comes through with really knowing the product and knowing the competitive landscape and knowing understanding trade-offs that they've made, understanding where they might be going next, understanding what they should be doing, things that, you know, they might not even thought about yet, is going to be a way to make yourself seem better than the average person coming in.
And within the Q&A, there's some folks that are referencing, you know, non-technical product management type opportunities, hardware. A lot of our conversation has been more on the software side. Has what you shared, does it change much when you're looking at other industries or, you know, less technical products or hardware versus software? Or do you feel like a lot of these elements are somewhat universal?
So I can talk to hardware versus software because I know a bunch of hardware PMs.
Okay.
That is very similar. You know, you don't need to understand software. You might need to understand plastics or metals or something like that. You do need to understand sort of like the supply chain aspect of it and different sort of trade-offs. But as far as like showing up and like thinking about, you know, if you're going to Apple and you're looking at working on like the AirPods, right? Understanding that they're making trade-offs between the size of the case and the battery charge, and you know the lightness in the air and the balance of it. Being thoughtful about all of that and showing that you can be thoughtful about all of that is super important. So I think all of that stays the same. Damien, I don't know if you want to touch on non-technical.
Yeah, so well, one thing I'd say on the non-technical, so I have a lot of a good number of friends, B school and so forth, who are non-technical and approach non-technical technical. In many cases, if you are purely truly non-technical, there may be either a question or sometimes a lot of people focus on just proving or having some chops to say like, I have worked on something technical, I've, you know, built this random thing on my own, or, you know, I know SQL or something along those lines, but they'll oftentimes too, you can see that sometimes come up in the interview. So especially if they would like a technical person, or a lot of people happen to be technical, but it's not a requirement, you may kind of get a little more of a challenge, for lack of a better word, or questions specifically around, you know, your capability to work on a software product or project. And I think either having, you know, a clear-cut understanding, focusing also on roles or products that are non-technical. Amazon makes a very clear-cut distinction versus AWS technical PM, and then e-commerce. E-commerce, you do not need to have a technical background. You can be a PM for babies. Diapers is a friend of mine was the PM for like babies. But you know, friend on AWS, like he you know, I gave up programming and he's like he was like Rob. So that's some of the things I've seen a little bit between the technical and non-technical.
Yeah, I mean, I would say even with my background, where I had a degree in mechanical engineering and I don't have a traditional computer science background, but I had, before coming to Google, been effectively a software engineer for like 5 years. My interviewers challenged me on my ability to do software engineering. There was definitely a lot of push to ensure that I was as technical as I was claiming to be. So that there's definitely roles in which they're going to push hard on that one.
Okay. Preparing for the interview. So you found the opportunity, you know, your application has got you to the interview stage. I know there are an infinite number of books out there on the product management interview, and you can spend, you know, an inordinate amount of time, you know, searching around online and trying to, you know, cull together insights on that. Kind of what did you all do? What did you find to be, you know, the right or the best use of your time and preparing for the interview?
Yeah. Well, you go. I will say I'm not always the best use of time. I go kind of super hard. I'm like, I want to get the job 3 times over, and at that point, then I'm like ready to take the interview. I practice the bad example. It was like 3 months. I kept delaying my Facebook interview just to kind of like, hone. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, right.
And again, I intentionally didn't use the word, you know, efficient, because, you know, maybe you over prepare, or in retrospect, it's, well, if I woulda, but, you know, kind of how
what are
spending those days and weeks in preparation.
So one thing for me is mocks, doing a mock interview. Now obviously there are platforms and stuff, but used to just do it with friends. One of my friends worked at Facebook, went to Facebook. We did a mock interview in the room so I could get a sense of their whiteboards and stuff like that. I've done it with like other friends. There are a couple books now, so now there are actually books. Back in the day, there weren't any. Cracking the PM Code, Decode and Conquer. Um, uh, a bunch of others I can't remember right now. There's, Udemy classes, things along those lines. But I've found that personally, really, the thing I tell people the most to work on is the product case. Create a new product for bike runners that, for Facebook, or Uber wants to sell books. Like how, what was a product for Uber to sell books? There's several different frameworks. I kind of tell people find one that works for them. Circles is a really common one. But anyways, a lot of really getting good at that case question. So how to structure it, going through the different parts, how you explain to it, how you explain and talk to it. Prepping for that particular company. So Rob said something, I mean, I think especially for small companies, but definitely so for big ones, understand that company very, very well. Be able to show your interest and understanding and knowledge. If you can, especially if it's a really small company, especially if your interviewer is not a product person, if you can tell them something kind of about their product and industry that they don't already know, and that is way easier if the person's not another PM. Really good. Oh, and another thing too is figure out either from online news or from a friend at the company, what is keeping people awake? And a lot of times, if you can talk or address to that or speak around it. Video was this huge issue at the company, and there was like overnights, people working on it. So people who came in and could actually give a product case or talk about things in the context of video, or talked about why video is important to show this understanding, because everyone was thinking about it, it automatically made you bond with that person just a little bit more.
I agree with all of that. I actually use Cracking the PM interview as that was like my go-to book. I would say the book should be sort of your starting point for interview prep, and then you should do mocks, and you should do them with people that are going to ask you really hard questions and are going to be difficult. Like the first couple mock interviews that I had with people that were at Google before I joined, they just destroyed me. And that's exactly what you need, because at least these very competitive roles, and most of these roles are going to be competitive. You want to be challenged, so have somebody who's going to give you sort of hard mock questions. I've done a lot of interview prep for people that have come to Google afterwards, and that kind of letting them know how difficult it can be, and pushing and challenging, and giving them sort of very blunt feedback, I think is essential for them to be able to be ready to actually play when it comes to interview time. So I think that's hugely important. The question that I always focus on thinking through products is one of my go-to interview questions was name a product that you think is bad, right? And have people talk about a product that they think is bad, and then have them dissect why it's bad, why, even though it's bad, it's still popular enough that we can have a conversation about it, right? That means that there is some use case and some users, and figure out how to make it better. So being able to really dissect a product, which I think the product case gets to sort of similar thinking, but being able to dissect a product and dissect what trade-offs the product manager made, and why they might have made the wrong trade-offs, or what trade-offs you would make slightly different, and why that might or might not make sense for the company. But just showing that level of analytical rigor around decisions that people made on products, I think is very helpful to be able to show in an interview.
Okay. And then kind of the last, kind of plan topic is something we call, closing the deal, which you can interpret different ways, but you've gone through the process, you've identified the opportunity, you've applied, you have done the interview, and you've gotten an offer. Are there other, I guess, considerations, negotiations, considerations that you had once you received that offer, or were you trying to get multiple offers from multiple places? Did you kind of take the first offer that you got, or kind of how did that story go for you all in your first job in this space?
I would say ideally you want multiple offers because you will end up in a better place if you have multiple offers. When I went to Google, Google was the place that I wanted to end up. But having other places and like sort of being able to play them off each other is definitely something that is valuable. The one thing I wanted to be cognizant of with my first role, which I would be probably a little more ambitious, if I was going back through a process, was I wouldn't have enough time to ensure that I could prep appropriately if I didn't get this role for whatever next role at whatever other company, because it was the first time I was sort of becoming an official product manager. So that led me to sort of limit my pipeline a little bit, which I think in hindsight was the right choice because it did give me time to focus and prep. But that's kind of the trade-off that you have to be aware of.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's an important point. I mean, it certainly, I guess there is a way to say this is the job that I want, and I'm going to put all of my efforts into that. But you got to play the odds a bit. And, I think in undergrad, I work with some students and they're applying to 50 companies. Now, that's their main job. They're not working full time, like students in our grad program or other folks making career switches. But one is probably not enough, I assume. That you want to have a few, maybe double digit, applications in motion, if you're serious about making that move. So
yeah,
okay.
I would say one is not enough, 50 is too much.
Yeah. And then Damien, on your side, similar? You were looking at multiple roles, multiple companies.
Yeah. So few aspects. So one, yeah, multiple roles, multiple companies, and sometimes it'll come in waves. To Rob's point, if I had a very good sense that an offer was coming or I did get an offer, I oftentimes would very quickly as possible, get a secondary offer. I would like find a company that I'm like potentially even overqualified for, so I can kind of get blown through, because just another offer is another offer. Understand equity. So especially if you're going to tech, especially if you're going to big tech, actually doubly, triply so if you're going to a startup. All right. A lot of your compensation, closing the deal, terms can get very complex, especially as you move up in your career, right? So it's, there's a base salary, there's probably a bonus or target bonus, there's going to be equity, which will be vested over some period of time. How much that equity is, the stage the company is in, what the rules are if you leave or are asked to leave, and these all come into play, and these can be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars when it comes to like closing the deal and things along those lines. Depending, when I mentioned before, if you ask during the interview about what level you're going to come in at, you won't be hired. After you get the offer is exactly when you need to ask about that. You need to understand, what level you're coming in at, what level do you think is right for you or not right for you. You don't want to be misleveled. As much as you can, understand the compensation band for that level to understand within it and make the best case. There are literally like $700,000 swings. Director at Google right now on levels pays between $800K to $1.2 million in terms of total comp. It's a huge range, $400,000 per annum, right? Understanding what that 800 to 1.2 is composed of, the different components, and whether you need to ask for more shares versus a higher bonus versus you want box seats to the Warriors games. I mean, these are all on the table. And even you'll start to understand too, perks and things like that can really come into play, both from a tax aspect. Even how, I don't want to go too, there's a lot to understand, but like equity, I think, and compensation is one really, really big aspect. It can get very complicated, very nuanced. There are literally the type of stock option can have a huge tax implication, and literally for example, I was laid off from my first startup. We had a down round and they laid off, they did 2 rounds of layoffs. I was laid off 4 days before my 1-year cliff. Yeah, see, and the fact that you need to understand that, and there are things I now negotiate every single time I take a job now based on that, because I actually had 4 times the amount of stock options as another friend of mine. Again, just negotiation. But I also think that probably he did not get laid off, and I'm partially because I threw way more options back to the pool. So anyways, these are things. Oh, and signing bonus, I completely forgot about that. Signing bonuses, I think they've probably tamed down, but I know at one point, if you had interned and were returning, it was 100K like out of undergrad. These signing bonuses can be non-trivial, and especially since the average tenure at a lot of big tech companies is something like 2.5 years. Understand that you probably won't get all of your compensation. Amazon, for example, is very known for having a tail-weighted equity policy. That means your last like 2 years is when you get more of your stock compared to most a Google, Facebook, or Uber. Compensation. Oh, and one resource I will recommend is it Compound? With Compound. Yeah, I think it's a financial advisory firm. They were actually a competitor to the company that acquired me, but they have very detailed resources around understanding equity and options and stock options and different types of options and tax implications.
Excellent. Excellent. We have a number of questions here, and I think both of you guys are able to see those as well. Maybe we can try and step through a few, and we've been responding via text to a number of these as well. So, Damien, the first one you might be uniquely positioned for. It's referencing projects and examples within our master's program courses. So, as I mentioned, I'm the director of our master's in product management. We're an online kind of part-time professional program, and Damien is one of our faculty. He actually teaches the fundamentals of product management course. That is the first course within that program. So the question is asking about projects, real-world examples, perhaps things they could put on a resume that speaks to their capabilities or credential.
Yeah. One thing, and as I mentioned, this in particular comes up with a lot of MBAs or B school folks, who they are, and it's a common question field. One is, if you have a friend, colleague, or random person that you can work for free, do it. I had one friend, he was in finance, and he's at Snapchat now as a PM. He's been there like 8 years, but he, before going to grad school, he quit, found a random startup that allowed him to work there as a PM for 6 months, and that was his experience. That counted. That immediately put him above 90% of people who have no experience. Start a project. The project can be, for example, I started a blog many years ago. The blog and how I approached marketing it and the data analytics behind it, the hiring, the way we positioned it was exemplified a lot of product management things. And so I would put it on my resume. Other people have just written a random app. If you publish an app, and it can be is kind of dumb, it's in the App Store. You can put it on your resume. You worked on it. And a lot of times it's going to be being able to talk intelligently about that project and selling it. Why did you build that app? How did you think about it? How did you teach yourself or hire someone? Things along those lines. So those are some projects and some examples I tell people to go out and have the resume.
Especially like on the building an app thing, if you outsource a little bit of it, and then like now you're managing people, and like you could outsource somebody to market it a little bit, and now you're managing marketing and like looking at those analytics, and like all of these things, they don't have to you don't have to get up to big numbers to actually have the experience and sort of be able to evaluate something. And if something doesn't work out, you talk about why it didn't work out. That's sort of just not as good as if it works out, but totally fine.
Yeah. Oh, and the last thing to add to that too is there are also a bunch of tangential roles, right? Go do a data science project, go deep and understand data and SQL. That's super popular. People, want to see that in PMs. If you present, you do a good presentation online, whatever it may be, speaking ability, that type of stuff. Marketing, again, market something, be able to speak through it and talk to it. Yeah, all good related roles.
Excellent. And Rob, if you can see this first question from Enrico, and it's tied to a couple of other questions. One is, kind of differentiating product management from project management.
Mhm.
And then related to that, within the product side of the house and who you're interacting with, there are various roles, within that product management scope as well. So
Yeah, I can
perhaps
talk to that.
differentiating product from project would be a start. And then within product, either kind of day in the life or hierarchy or however you think is the best way to kind of highlight how you've seen that work.
Yeah. So at Google, project management is more making sure the trains are running on time. So keeping everybody coordinated. So I had a project manager for my product. At Google, everything, at least in ads, everything works across multiple teams, right? There's no one team that can do everything. So I was in charge of a campaign, but there was a team that enforced policy and ads review. There was a team that changed the actual UI and the campaign creation interface. There was a team that did sort of a lot of the hardcore infrastructure. And the project manager was making sure that all of those pieces lined up and that we were correctly prioritized within everyone. Obviously, some of that responsibility fell on me as well, but that was kind of how we split that. I would more define the product, and they would help the coordination between all of the different teams, because there is fundamentally a lot of coordination at a big tech company. The rest of my time was spent with, I was in ads, so a lot of time with sales. Sales was kind of my window into the customer. I would hear from sales what customer desires were. So that was part of the process. Support also was part of that, hearing what problems they were running into, and then working with my engineers on what we were building and what we could potentially build in the future and how things could get better, and helping my engineers understand, why we were building and what was important in that process. And then finally, you work with user research and design for me, it was for understanding how people interacted with ads and then figuring out new ad formats to put out in the world. But that's kind of like all of the different functions that I interacted with. Damien, I assume that your world was similar.
No, somewhat. So one, Facebook doesn't believe in project managers for the most part. Well, okay, there are project
managers.
So, and I mean, this is actually a somewhat quite hotly debated topic. So at Zynga, for example, we had a producer, and our producer was the equivalent of a product manager. They helped with a little more of just like the task and organizing, so you could think more about what we should be building and the overall vision, the metrics, where they could help a little bit more of just, and we had like part of our development team was in Argentina. We had some in the States and things like that. At Facebook and also at Tiny Code, the startup, it was between kind of a agreement between the engineer and product manager. Like who, how, what level, like, do you crack the whip more? Do I crack it? Things along those lines. His friend used to describe it, your engineering head and the product head are mommy and daddy. He was like, you don't want to argue in front of the kids, aka the rest of the team, but you should always have kind of that unified front. So typically we would share the project management specifically. But there was a hardcore delineation. The project managers, they were called technical program managers. They would work usually on projects that weren't always directly tied to a product. So there was one who worked on, we had a system, I worked on location and maps and places. A big part of that was to measure the accuracy of that. There was a technical project manager who ran 4 offices with teams in Warsaw, Philippines, to check and manage throughput of checking the work that we did. So, it wasn't like directly tied to the product, but we all were very invested. She managed a large project and program that we all, heavily both invested in. We would actually like do work for her because it behooved us and she didn't have her own engineers type of thing.
Excellent. There's one question regarding does digital product management stand out from general product management? I'm not sure the context of what you mean by standing out, but have you all heard this kind of descriptor of digital product management as being a thing on its own, or you're a product manager and it can apply to a variety of different aspects?
So I haven't heard that term digital product manager specifically. I have seen this concept. So in particular, when I was at Citibank, my manager, he was like, just so you know, there are a bunch of people here that are called product managers. They are not product managers. I was like, what do you mean? He was like, they have a product and they manage it, but it's not what you think. That project may even be technical. It may even be software, but both how they approach it, it's just like, it's a different job, it's a different construct. And then, you can kind of get into the nuances. Someone may generally, I think digital is going to be software related. It's probably going to be online based, centrally managed. If you're doing, to your point, if you're the product manager for earbuds, I wouldn't call you a digital product manager. So I don't necessarily hear people use that term, but the concept, I kind of have heard it as a means to differentiate that the more fangy kind of typical product versus the entire swath of everything that qualifies and means product management. In finance, for example, you can be managing a fixed income product and you are a product manager of this like fixed income product.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's one question, at least on the top of my screen, regarding important things to keep in mind when talking to a recruiter. I think we spoke a little bit to that perhaps, but in the context of maybe on the very front end, Damien, you mentioned that, you would go on LinkedIn and you would try and search out recruiters. And I'd say maybe it's more important, what do you tell them at the start versus, once you're in the funnel, so to speak. So, what are you putting in that message to them on LinkedIn initially?
Yeah. So, all right, I'm digging deep because I'll admit, I don't have to apply for jobs anymore. They just come through DMs. But there was a traditional, back when I was in grad school, I had a very strict cover letter regime. So it was a template. It was 3 paragraphs. I would always custom write the first one and the bottom 2 are pasted. The first one was like, why I am great for you. And like you and your company and you, and like, I know your cousin and like, me and you are kindred. The next 2 would be more broadly about, I think it was either why, I think first was more general background. So kind of like, here are some interesting talking points that, stand out. I want to pull out and show you from my resume. And then lastly, it was kind of like closing, right? I'm really interested in this role. I'm really interested in talking to you. I want to follow up, things along those lines. Shortening that down, what that looks like is typically it's going to be, use humor to your, to the level that you're comfortable with. But potentially, break the ice. Hey, I know I'm sliding in your DMs, or like, hey, I wanted to reach out because I'm very interested in this role, something along those lines. They're not going to be offended because they are a recruiter. There's an expectation that people will just show up at their house and want a job. Don't show up at their house. Then, I think it is, especially in this very noisy world, as much as you can and condense almost in like 1 to 2 sentences, why you and the company, the role, or something. I'm super interested in transportation from, spending 3 months as a taxi cab driver, or my dad did this thing, or something along those lines, right? Kind of, why should I care about continuing to read this? I'm getting pinged a lot and things along those lines. And then I kind of would want to move it quickly into a kind of like next steps ask type of thing, right? So I like broke the ice a little bit, trying to explain to you and really hone on why I'm great for this role, 1, 2 unique asks or aspects about myself that really will help me stand out. And then kind of I'd love to follow up. I'd love to call. I've already applied. I have a friend at the company, right at that end. Oh, I forgot that. Definitely mention if you have a contact. That is always going to be great. Or even if you pseudo knew someone, if you see that you have a second person in common, because if that person is interested, they're going to follow up with that other person, and you're going to have a significant leg up on anyone else. You wrote to them, you explained why you're a good fit, you show that there's some relative context, they can kind of do a little bit background check on you, and obviously they're going to be able to look at your profile too. And I found those have worked reasonably well to either just get a response, or there have been cases where I've applied somewhere, several days later, then sent that message, and suddenly my application status changed.
The one thing I would want to, you should keep in mind when you're dealing with recruiters is like their goal is to fill that role, right? Like their number one goal every day is to fill as many roles as possible. So if you can present yourself as someone who can fill that role well, right? Like you highlight like this is why you're qualified and you're interested and you're great. Like that's kind of what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Great. And so there's kind of a related question on, if you've had a background as the founder of a company, might that relate to an application? If you worked in a non-tech PM role, some years back, how might that apply? Understanding it's somewhat contingent on what is it exactly that you're applying for. I would assume if there's an opportunity to make your background fit what they're looking for, then, you argue that case.
Yeah. I mean, Google loved former founders because like you're fundamentally you're doing all the PM job and a bunch of other stuff, right? Like you're also doing taxes and annoying stuff, but you're doing all of the understanding the user's problems, figuring out how to work with people to get that product shipped. Like you're doing all of the PM roles. So like Google love former founders. Like that was a big part of the reason that I was able to get in.
Okay.
100% co-signed, agreed. It's there's like two things that are very sexy kind of like entering the interview is one, you worked at a senior role at my direct competitor. Great, right?
Yeah.
And the second thing is even if you were, I'd say the best is like there was some pseudo success, and like now, after selling off my company, I've now wanted to take all that learning to your company and that type of thing. But to Rob's point, a lot of people do talk about PMs being the mini CEO role or founder training ground. During my interview, someone told me to take the job if you want to start your own company. He's like, you're going to get way more money, you're going to get way more funding, and you're going to find better co-founders 1 to 2 years here as opposed to.
That's true.
Yeah. So I think a lot of companies love that to see that. And I think the one point to think about, and Rob would love to hear too in terms of how, is just why now do you want a job? I think sometimes there's a little bit of a fear of like, you're not going to like it here. It's going to be either too much structure or, you're just here to steal some more PMs and something like that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I presented it as I wanted to sort of like, I had done the founder thing with a small company. I wanted to really learn and like grow at a bigger company and have that mentorship piece, which had the benefit of being true. But that was how I framed that. But yeah, it is very different. We definitely hired some founders that hated their jobs immediately and left because there's nothing similar to being a Google PM and founder, except for the like, you're dealing with customers and sort of like doing that, but like your day-to-day is much more bureaucratic and much more dealing with a political organization.
Yeah.
All right. I was trying to type a response to what I think is our final question, and we are exactly at 7. So thanks for spending an hour, with us this evening. Thanks for our panelists on joining us. We have, again, hopefully given you some clarity on kind of how to prepare, how to find that opportunity, how to successfully pursue it. And if you can get one of these $1 million offers, what to consider in negotiating that. As a footnote, that's not the average for product management roles. I think what we see
feels like that's not what you get at first.
Yeah, that's not what you start with, but also where you start doesn't have to be where you finish. But we Again, hope that we've given you some insight and some action items, and I've kind of spurred you to continue to explore and pursue the topic. We will be sending a follow-up email to you, kind of thanking you for your attendance, and we'll include within that our contact information here on the program side if you have any other questions as well. But again, thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.